Good morning, everyone. My name is Joy Wilkins. I want to welcome you to Max Minutes with Alvin Glymph with the United Way of Greater Atlanta. We have a great session with you this morning. Actually, Alvin and I were just having a fun conversation just a moment ago, and I can just tell you you're in for a real treat this morning. At first, I want to just give a special shout out to our anchor investors who make this work that we do through Max possible. That's Workforce Georgia with the Technical College System of Georgia, the Georgia Department of Human Services, Workforce Metro Atlanta, which represents the 5 local workforce boards in Metro Atlanta. That's CareerWise, Goodwill North Georgia, Metro Atlanta, BDI, Ferrovial, and First Step Staffing. So a special shout out to each of these organizations. Again, we would not be here without their amazing support. My name is Joy Wilkins. I serve as your facilitator for Max. We're going to have a great session here with Alvin. Alvin came and actually spoke to our Leadership Max class of 2025 back in February, and some of us who were in the room were immediately thinking, oh, we got to invite Alvin back for Max Minutes to open this up to y'all. So super excited. We'll go ahead and hand this over to Alvin in just a moment, and then please feel free to post your questions in the chat or the Q&A function, and we will be sure to get to those questions before we wind our time up this morning. So without further ado, Alvin, happy to hand it off to you.
Thank you, Joy. Thank you, everyone, for coming out, joining us today, and thank you for inviting me back. This is a personal passion of mine. It is something that I literally have devoted my professional career to, which is this idea of using data to make a difference in our community. And so I am Alvin Glymph, Interim Chief Community Impact Officer of the United Way of Greater Atlanta. We've been around 120 years, celebrating our 120th anniversary this year, and excited to be here today and here to talk about our Child Wellbeing Index, which is an online tool, a resource that we make available to the community where you can go online and get a sense of how well we are doing as a community, we being the entire region, how well we're doing serving children and families. We are in the midst of our third release. We released it in June of 2023. And so when we released it, this was the message, the goal, the sentiment of what we wanted to accomplish in our rollout. And so I always like to start with this slide just to set the tone, just to remind people what we're trying to accomplish, so that as I walk through the journey of the index and how we have evolved and what we're trying to accomplish, you can get a sense of how huge of a task, but how we believe that data and really this idea that we need to care not just about our own, but the others in our region, and how we're using all of this to make a difference in our community. So always like to start with this question, right? Before I get into it, consider a world where if a child grew up in poverty, they had a 96 chance of moving into the middle class. And I just asked, just think about what this region would look like if that was true. And I say if because it's not. It's actually the opposite. That only 4% of children who grow up in poverty have a chance to move up into the middle class in Greater Atlanta. And we used to use that 4% stat. I mean, we've been using it for almost a decade now. And they actually just did the research again, and it still went up to maybe 4.5%. I bring this into the room not just to give you a sense of what type of hill we're looking to climb, but I also want to bring the aspirations, the potential, the hopes and dreams of that 96% into all of our hearts, because ultimately that's what we're trying to accomplish. And I truly believe if it was 96%, so much of our challenges, economic issues would just be so different. And so please look at what we are trying to accomplish as this movement of addressing the economic mobility challenges of Atlanta that ultimately have us last on that list. One of like the worst city, despite all of the wealth, despite of all of the universities, the thought leadership, the economic growth, the Super Bowl, the World Cup, everything that come here. The reality is, if you uh, if you are born poor, is the data says you have a 96% chance of dying. Now, let's talk about the Child Wellbeing Index. So, child well-being for Greater Atlanta, United Way, Greater Atlanta, is ultimately the foundation of what drives our effort. And when we say child well-being, understand that it's not just this idea that we love children. We do love children. It's not just that so much of our efforts are invested in improving the lives of children. That is correct. But we call it child well-being because for us, child well-being is a methodology, a holistic, comprehensive approach that believes that if you want a child to thrive, then you have to also take care of the family. And so if a child and family are thriving, I challenge you to look at a community in our area and also say, show me where children and families are thriving and their businesses and the institutions around them are not thriving as well. And so for us, when we say child well-being, we believe it's a holistic, comprehensive approach, an ecosystem that wraps their hands around that child and also addresses the issue of family and the community around them. And so child well-being is our belief of how we're going to get our region to be a thriving region. And so we started the child well-being movement in 2015. And for maybe about a year and a half later, we realized that we needed a way to document how well we are doing serving children and families. Thus, the Child Wellbeing Index was born. And so we started it in 2017. It was based on 14 measures, and it wasn't just some really cool people, smart people sitting in United Way who said, these are the measures. No, we had focus groups, conversations after conversations with school districts, with nonprofits, with state agencies, with some of our grantees, with some of our corporate partners, to really get a sense of what would be the metrics, what are the data that would help capture the idea of children and families are being served appropriately. I was one of the facilitators. I was a consultant working with United Way at the time. And I remember the hundreds of data measures that we had on the wall. We would do the data walk and we would vote with the dots to say, okay, these are the data that we think and we that would make a difference. And we whittled it down from 200 down to 70. And ultimately, we landed on 14 in 2017. Those measures, ultimately, we created this score for the region that started at 58 when we released it in 2017. So out of 100, it was a 58. So not too good when you think of that it was on a scale of 100. But it was still a sense of this is the baseline and let's see where we go from here. When we released it again in 2019, it went up to a 63. And then we released it in June of 23. It's now a 64. So ultimately, we are making progress. We still have a long way to go, but it is based on this belief in terms of the progress. We believe it's because more and more individuals and organizations are using this index, using data to make data informed decisions. And so in the United Way, the index informs how we invest with our hundreds of organizations that we fund. And we've also started tracking how many other organizations use the index to guide their strategic planning as well as some of their investments and partnerships. And so now that list is, I think it's about 160. That list, we refer to them as child well-being adopters, people who have adopted the index to inform their decisions. So when we released it in 23, we wanted to listen to our internal and external stakeholders to see how could we refine the index to make it better in this third release. And so here are the 16 measures. So it actually grew from 14 from the original release to now 16 measures. And we heard from our community that student mobility is something that should be part of the index. Access to broadband internet, food accessibility, and the percent of 16 to 19-year-olds who are either in school or in the workforce are should be part of the index. And if you think about when those conversations were happening post COVID or in the midst of COVID, actually, you can understand why student mobility, as families were, dealing with economic challenges and having to move, access to broadband, internet, food accessibility, the student engagement or disengagement with school, how those factors rose up in the conversations. And as we found suitable measures, measurable measures that could be tracked over time from reliable sources, data that could also be broken down to the census tract level, to the neighborhood level, that's ultimately how they got added to the index. And so these 16 measures we get from the federal government as well as the state government, and we use them to build a score for the entire region, for the 13 counties that we serve, and then all of the census tracts within those 13 counties. If I was here, if we were all in a room, I would, do a little challenge and ask everybody how many census tracts in those 13 counties. But I'll just go ahead and throw it out there for you. There's 1,260 census tracts in those 13 counties. And so it is up to us and our neighborhood partners. Shout out to Neighborhood Nexus. They are amazing data gurus. They are our technical assistant partner in terms of the child well-being index, and they help us build the score for the census tracts, the 13 counties, and ultimately a region. And then once we build those scores, we put it on a scale to determine what is going to be the child well-being category for each of the individual census tracts. And I'll talk more about that when we get to the map. But just wanted to share what the measures look like, and you get a sense of how comprehensive and holistic this index is. So it's not just third grade reading, it's not just high school graduation, but it also takes into consideration unemployment, who has healthcare insurance, who's going off to college, the housing affordability. So really it just reflects not just our investment, but the community's perspective on how we are really gauging our families and communities thriving or not. So those conversations that we had with our internal and external partners helped us make some other refinements that I want to share. So if you are familiar with the map from the first and second release, you would recognize these colors of the traditional red, yellow, and green format. What we heard from our communities was pretty clear in that when you are releasing your map and you are identifying these communities of what we referred to then as low child well-being communities, and you make the communities red, people are looking at that, they are interpreting that as failing communities. And I must admit, initially, I was in my feelings when I heard that and said, whoa, wait a minute, that's not what we were trying to do. We were just trying to use colors that people understood, and we were trying to communicate in a very simplistic way. But as we went back into our own our offices and thought about it and reflected, it wasn't about what we intended to do. It was really about what was happening in real time. And so what we are committed to doing, because these are communities that we are looking to work with and partner with and help them build strategies to improve those particular communities in the region overall. It was more it was on us to own the outcome and make the changes that were necessary. And so it was a simple fix of just let's just change the colors. And what I appreciate is that when we went back into the community with the release, people who were in those focus groups would come up to me and say, "Hey, Alvin, thank you. I appreciate you listening, you hearing us, and honoring what was happening in our communities. Another change is we shifted from releasing our data at the zip code level and moved over to sharing it by census tracts. So that also took a lot of internal conversations and encouraging. And ultimately, while I didn't agree, because I was someone who worked at the school district before coming here to United Way, I worked with the Cobb County Schools. And for me, when we would apply for grants, I understood that as you're going after grants, most of the funders, most of the corporate and government grant RFPs are asking you to share need based on zip code. So my pushback was that it's going to get a lot of challenges because those who are using our index to go after grants, they're going to have to figure out how are they going to utilize census tracts. And I thought it would be very challenging for those who were using our index. That was not the case at all. If anything, people truly appreciated that we were able to drill down to the census level, to the census tract level, and get more granular in our analysis. This change also came from the feedback that when we were releasing our data and we would share the child well-being data, what the scores were for each of the zip codes, we would publish that and make it and being transparent, we would share by zip code, here's the child well-being score. What we were hearing in our conversations is that there were individuals who were ranking those zip codes by the scores of child well-being and then sharing their belief that if these zip codes, if you're on the top of the list and you got a high child well-being score, these are the zip codes, these are the communities to live in. And conversely, if you're at the bottom of those that list, these are the failing communities, the zip codes that you want to avoid. Do not live in those communities. And again, when we heard that, we had to check ourselves because that wasn't what we wanted to do. We were really just trying to be transparent, but we decided to stop sharing data at the neighborhood level. What ultimately caused us to move from from zip codes to census tract is that when we started mapping our data and looked at it at the zip code level and looked at it at the census tract level, what we were noticing is that because zip codes are much larger geographic units compared to census tract, that there were often times where in a zip code, a community that is thriving is sitting next to a community that's not doing so well. But when you aggregate and average those data together, the zip code might look better than you might assume. And so what we wanted to offer is no, we need to tell the story of what's really happening in Atlanta. And what's really happening in Atlanta is sometimes you are walking down the street and you might be in a community that has $1 million homes. And if you make a right, you might be in a community that's not so good, right? And so we wanted to make sure that that story is told to affirm what's really happening in our region. So let's talk about some of our key findings. What have we learned? So here's what the map looks like. And so you can see the shift in colors. We moved from the red, yellow, green. Now we're on dark blue, slightly darker blue, all the way down to gold. Again, very easy fix. The index map, when you look at it, it's really easy, simple way to see where are the greatest needs in our community. And to me, the map is one of the best assets of the index overall, because in itself, if you show this map, people are able to see, you know what, that's a community we need to invest in. That's a community that needs additional resources compared to others. It affirms so many of our experiences, this map as well. And what I mean by that, when I came into Atlanta 30 something years ago, I heard often way back then that there was a North Fulton and there's a South Fulton. Well, you can look pretty clear on our map that when you get around I-20, something is happening around when you go south of that community, that's where all the blue stars compare to the north, right? And so my point is that it's this type of illustration that allows the individuals, the residents, the government officials, those who are trying to tell the story of what's happening in our region. This map just affirms that. And so the other thing I want to point out when you look at this slide is the change in how we reference child well-being. So no longer are we talking very very low child well-being to high child well-being. Now we're talking in terms of need, right? So that was something else we heard about. Can we describe it differently? And so the need now reflects our personal, our organizational perspective of what's happening in those communities. Not that we're saying that they are needy, that they don't have assets. What we are referencing by need is that they are in need of resources. And compared to other communities, these communities have least need. So that's how we're using the word need, not making a disparaging or stigmatizing comment in terms of referencing the need, saying those are needy communities. One of our major insights is when we look at what is the number of census tracts, the number of children who are in those highest need and high need categories of child well-being. So when we looked at the highest need and high need categories, out of those 1,260 census tracts that I referenced earlier, 505 of them are in the highest need and high need categories. That reflects 500,000 children. 500,000 children, just to give context. That would be Mercedes-Benz, which holds 100,000 individuals. Fill that up 5 times with children. That's how many children in our 13 counties are in the highest need and high need categories. That dark blue and little less dark blue category, right? So that is, again, the the gravity of what we're trying to impact in our work. And that's one of our major insights. Second one is what we refer to as 79 communities. So because we're able to look at our data longitudinally, and we looked at the data from the 2023 release to the 2019 release, we looked at the number of communities that were in our highest and high need categories, that 505 number again, 505 census tracts. Well, how many of them actually got worse when from the 2019 to the 2023 release? How many of those 505 census tracts significantly declined in those 4 years? 79 of those communities significantly declined. So they were already in the highest and high need categories. We looked at it 4 years later, they got worse by at least 7 child well-being points. So that's what significantly declined was based on what we established as a standard. Those 79 communities represent 77,000 children. Also like to point out, when you look at this map reflects where are those census tracts, where are those 79 communities, and they are pretty much throughout all of the 13 counties. So there's this dynamic of highest and high need communities that have significantly declined is something that is shared amongst our region. Another one of our major insights was our 14,000 opportunity youth. So I referenced earlier a new measure, the 16 and 19-year-olds who are not in school or not in the workforce. We estimate that there were 14,000 of them when we released our index. And so to be honest, the number wasn't as high as I imagined. Maybe as I watched too much news, I thought that number was going to be 100,000 of our children who are actually not in school or not in the workforce, but it actually turned out to be 14,000, and the map reflects where those communities are, where we have the greatest need in those 14,000. And so what this map has allowed us to do is, as we go around and we are advocating for more programs to serve this demographic. It allows us to really pinpoint when we're going into our counties where exactly are these pockets of youth that are disengaged from the school or disengaged from the workforce, and allow us to build interventions or share this data with communities that are saying, hey, I see where that challenge is. Maybe it's a program of a mentor program that we could focus on. Maybe it's a athletic program we can build. Maybe it's a college and career readiness pipeline we can be thinking about. And for us at United Way, the way we invest, try to make a difference, is through our College Bound initiative, where we're working with school districts to work to offer more college readiness and college prep and college access activities, as well as our Career Ready ATL effort, which ultimately is focused on paid apprenticeships with our youth, trying to get them career exploration, but also put some money so that they are focused on these high demand but sustainable career options as well. Want to share a little bit how we use it to inform our advocacy efforts, because it's not just about investing in our grantees. It's not just about sharing, but we also are trying to make a difference in the community in a really tangible way. And so it's through the investments. We also want to change the narrative so that people can appreciate what's truly happening, but from a data formed in perspective, because we know that data ultimately is the unifier, because it's not about opinion, it's not about bias. If you can really get into the numbers and drill down, it allows us to focus on where the greatest needs are in our community. So for us and how we are using this data to make that difference, here is an example of some data that we share with one of our county partners. This is just one of the many data requests and outside agency to say, I see the index, I see the map, I see the data that's available on your website though, but can you offer additional insight? Can you come over to our agency, come over to our school district and share what it looks like, specifically drilling down into our community? And so this was something that we shared with the DeKalb County School District. Another way that we share our data is through our convenings. And so I was actually sharing with Joy earlier that before I was elevated to this interim chief community impact officer role as a vice president strategic partnerships, and big part of my role was going around the region sharing this index, but also we hosted convenings, what we referred to as our inforums, where we would have not only share information on the index, but we would have panel discussions that were have our funders, have our grantees, have lived experience individuals talking about a particular measure on the index. This one in particular was about workforce readiness. We did our last one in May, and that was the 20th inform we did from, that was October of 2023 until this last one was in May. And so issues on teacher retention, literacy, maternal health, workforce development. Really, we tried to identify some of the hot button topics of the index and had over 1,100 attendees. But ultimately, this was about not just drilling into the index, but convening partners, convening citizens to talk about how can they use this opportunity to be different and make the this experience something that when they left, they were focused on making that particular metric better in their community. So very proud of our Inform effort and the opportunity to partner with corporate funders and partner with some of our grantees as we brought this throughout the region. And ultimately, I'm just excited about what we will do in our next release and what the Inform might bring in June of 2026, which then gets me to just share that we release our index every 3 years. So while it was released in June of 23, we are ramping up and starting to have those conversations of the next release, which will come out hopefully spring of 2026. All of it is based on as data is released and how we can access data, but that is our goal. Looking forward to what that index will bring in terms of insights and our ability to again inform the region and engage the region from a community activation perspective. And I think this is my last slide. And I should say from the boardroom, not the boardroom, but from the boardroom to the barbershop was a mantra of mine, was that I wanted to make sure that this index was an asset, a tool to everyone. And so the picture of me on the left is over at Georgia State University, sharing what's happening in terms of our child well-being index and Inform. The picture on the right is me and some of my colleagues in Clayton County School District and some of the customers of my personal barbershop in Riverdale, where we took this index and had a facilitated conversation on what are the issues of that particular neighborhood at the census tract level in Riverdale. And so it was a fascinating conversation. If you've ever been to a barbershop, you can appreciate that the overwhelming majority of our conversations have nothing to do with data. So to bring data into that room was very, very different, but it was excellent because not only were we able to talk about what was the history of this community and how this community has changed, but there were gentlemen in the room who, when they looked at the data, when they looked at some of what the challenges were, they started strategizing of how they can make a difference in their local elementary schools, middle schools, and high schools. And it was also impactful for the school district, who, to their credit, did more listening than talking. And so I appreciate their support and their partnership. Clayton County Schools is a huge partner, signature partner of ours. And so for them to come and support this effort, but again, not be the big elephant in the room, but just sit there and listen and take in what was being said, some of it not great to hear. I just want to thank them and applaud them for their approach and support of my effort. And that's it. I'll stop there. I truly appreciate the time. I truly appreciate me coming to this room, because I appreciated last time the thoughtfulness, the leaders, the educators, the folks on how can we make workforce centered in our efforts in our region, and just glad to be part of it. And just, again, thank you for inviting me back.
Thank you so much, Alvin, for that discussion. It's just wonderful to see how United Way is not just collecting the data, but you're mobilizing the data and you're using that data to inform and incentivize action. So that's amazing. We do have a couple questions from some of the folks joining us, and then I have a couple questions as well. But let's start with Martina's question. She was looking at the child well-being index map that you had as a great barometer for community needs out there. I think you answered this question actually a little bit later in your presentation about how you all work to get the map in the hands of community partners with the various examples that you provided. But if folks wanted to share this map with others, or how can they, I know we'll send the presentation, your slide deck, to folks after this session. Do you have any other suggestions for them? And then Martina has a second question, but I'll stop there for a moment.
So definitely you can use a presentation to share the map. The map is also on our website, unitedwayatlanta.org, but we also entertain data requests. So we have one of our partners, Voices and GSANS, that when we released our map, we released our index, they had the great idea of they wanted to take their data, of the data they were collecting in terms of what's happening in terms of some of our outer school opportunities and investments, and they wanted to map their data on top and layer it on top of our map. And so there's a lot of sophisticated ways we can share that map. It's not just in terms of a JPEG or an image. We can actually share an ArcGIS file that allows you to do some real cool things in terms of technology and put your data on top of our data. But the best way is just to shoot me an email to say, would love to have a conversation on how to best use your data, whether it's through the map or actually some of the measured data itself at the county level, and we can work a solution out that helps you integrate your data and provide more context to your efforts.
Sure, everyone, that you get Alvin's contact information so you can follow up with him, whether it's to access the map or other data, or to follow up about exploring the potential for partnership to get the data out there. Martina's second question has to do with how would you define needs? And I know you kind of presented this index and how we've made some progress going from like 64 to 63. Is that out of 100,
Yeah.
that index? Okay.
So the number
So
is out of 100.
yeah, go
And
ahead.
so once we get all of the scores for the 1,260 census tracts, then we break them up into 5 categories from high need to low need.
And it's based on those 16 measures that you presented earlier.
Correct. So
Okay.
we get the 16 measures. We then calculate a score based on the data for each of those measures, and then that's how we then compute the score. We then create the score from 0 to 100.
Gotcha. Are there any measures that stick out for you in particular in terms of being most concerning for our region from your perspective?
So, great question, Joy. One, I'd like to say from United Way's perspective, I mean, everything we talk about in child well-being is holistic, comprehensive, intersectional, right? So we realize that there are individuals and organizations that focus on a particular measure. So I always want to just lead with, for us, it's all of it, right? But what your question is, what's most concerning? And for me, there are 2 that stand out. One is I spent a big part of my life focused on high school graduation. And so I always am focused on what does our high school graduation rates look like? What is that 16 to 19-year-old? What's that data look like? How many of our youth are going off to college? Because I truly appreciate that the youth who are in our high schools are going off to college, that they're the engine of our economic growth. So much of that matters. The other one that I want to lift up is 3rd grade reading and our literacy. And again, because I appreciate that 3rd grade reading is so predictive of outcomes for the future. And when you look at the research and take into consideration what 3rd grade reading is, based on the research, what it predicts, right? And so you can look at the data and say, well, if children and communities aren't reading, then the forecast is this. There are census tracts in the 13 counties where the 3rd grade reading proficiency rate is less than 10%. Yes, that means less than 10% of the 3rd graders who are graduating into 4th grade in those communities are reading at the proficient or excellent level. And so again, when you think about what we see in our region, what we are experiencing in terms of some of the challenges of crime and unemployment and disengagement, if we have communities where only 10% of their children are reading, that to me is the crisis of today. That's something we are heavily involved in at United Way. We have an initiative called Literacy and Justice for All, where we're focused on working with Marietta City Schools, Atlanta Public Schools, and KIPP, focused on implementing the science of reading so that we can help those particular school districts address that address that challenge. And we've seen some amazing gains in Marietta School, Marietta City District, and that's the one we've been in the longest. And so definitely want to lift up that particular school district and all of our school districts we're working with. But that one, because they leaned in, want to lift up Atlanta Speech School, Learn for Life, some of our partners that are also working with us in that initiative. Corey Kane in our organization leads that portfolio. So want to give her kudos. But we realize that this is a challenge. And so I hope that as we move forward in our work, that you'll see us scaling that work in other communities, because what we are focused on at United Way is how can we take what we know are best practices, what we know are interventions that are showing some progress, and working with some of our corporate partners, the philanthropic supporters of our efforts, and then taking that work into other communities so we can see similar progress. And so it's not, it's not just United Way. And that's the beauty of the United Way, is that we are about bringing, and our CEO Milton says this a lot, our effort is about bringing people who want to do good together to do more good. And so that's what this is all about. So I thank you for asking that question, because it's going to be a big part of what we do in this near future.
That's that's awesome, and it's all about partnerships, right? And
Yes,
getting into the grass roots of a community through those partnerships. And speaking of that, Joyce McKibben's post in the chat that she is speaking on behalf of a group called Success Mentorship, which is a new crime prevention and safety program in Lithonia, serving youth and young adults from 12 to 24. And it looks like it's a partnership between Repertoire, which is a 501c3 community resource center, and the Lithonia Police Department, as well as the DeKalb County School District. So sounds like Joyce would be interested in having that conversation with you about how best to partner. So Joyce, we'll make sure that you get Elvin's contact information for sure, and to have that conversation. Thanks so much for the
please.
good work you're doing, and for sharing that.
Thank you.
Savannah has a question. She's asking, what do you see as the most immediate action items for partners seeking to address one or more of the issues based on your insights so far? So, um, action items, I guess. And you kind of, you kind of addressed this a little bit in talking about the third grade reading level and the work that you're doing there, and before that, the high school graduation rates. But are there other action items that perhaps are on your radar to pursue that you're not already pursuing, or that you haven't already mentioned?
Yeah, I mean, I think when we look at the data, the ones that lift up again is this cradle to career pipeline, right? So that's a big focus of our effort. And so, how can we provide more um, credible, quality learning experiences for our young babies? How can we support our school districts in their effort? While I didn't show our academic recovery insight, there's learning loss. The impact of COVID is still happening in so much of our school system. So I tell people all the time, if you see a teacher, hug a teacher, because they are experiencing what so many of us have kind of moved past, right? We've moved past COVID, and we don't understand that in the school systems, though, there's still this legacy of what happened in terms of learning loss. So that's something we're still going to be focused on. How can we support our school district? And then ultimately making sure our kids have the appropriate career trajectories that we know are necessary for the future. The other thing I want to lift up, though, is housing. How can we address homelessness? How can we help more of our families get out of these motels into a trajectory of having sustainable housing? Because the student mobility rates, what people are experiencing in those motels, I cry when I read some of the narratives in terms of the reports from our funding, our partners who are doing that work. And the other thing is some of our health and maternal health challenges. And so the inforums that we did around the region that I described earlier, two of them were specifically focused on maternal health. totally opened my eyes to some of the challenges, some of the disparities that is happening in terms of what so many of our women are facing. And the stat that stuck with me is that 85% of these deaths are preventable. And so that to me, it just stuck in my spirit in terms of, well, what can we do to continue to collaborate and bring folks together?
Agent's work is certainly cut out for us, isn't it? When with respect to, I had that is a startling statistic to realize that so many maternal deaths could be prevented. That's amazing, and I think that's yeah. One of the things that you made a point of earlier in your discussion is the importance of messaging around this data, and how careful and intentional the United Way, your team has been, even from like not using the color red on maps, for example, to communicate, or changing with respect to whether or not you're focusing on census tracts versus zip codes, and even kind of doing that, and that's truly important. When you think about communicating to local stakeholders, in addition to those techniques that you've talked about, and what's your advice to some of the folks on the session with us this morning as they're trying to take this data to their local stakeholders? How best can they communicate these needs to them? You know,
Yeah. So my advice would be to avoid polarizing language in conversation. My advice would be to use data to broaden the tent, to get more people to want to do good. My my advice is to ultimately remind people that the only way we're going to really move the needle and get that 4% number that I started the conversation, our economic mobility, to change the slope on that data, is to more individuals to lean in and do. And I happen to live in one of those gold communities, right? And so I am fortunate enough, and my children and family fortunate enough that we're not experiencing a lot of what we talk about in terms of these challenges. I get into my car, I drive on the interstate, I park in a parking lot a parking garage that I don't have to experience what I'm describing right now. And I know that is the reality for so many of the individuals in our region. I get that. I also believe, though, that part of it is how can we embrace this idea that it is not just to the individual and their family to take care of their own, that it is truly our collective effort to take care of each other. And that if we don't embrace that, the problems and challenges that I see across the street will be mine, right? And so that's what I try to convey, is that let's argue less and let's focus on where we have commonality. What do we want to do? Because I every time I go into a room and ask the question, how many people believe that children and families should have what they need to achieve or work towards what they aspire in life? Overwhelmingly, everyone in their room raises their hand. And so I believe that's where we have common ground, this idea that we want families, we want children to have what they need. The data is a way to share where are the communities where we need to get them what they need. And so that's what I just have dedicated, and not I, United Way has dedicated our effort towards, is really using this data to help people appreciate that we have data that identifies where are the people, where are the places, and what are the problems.
it's really great advice, starting with like a question like that, that to point out the common ground that everybody has, that we all who doesn't want our children to do better, right? So starting that's awesome. The other thing that struck me about what you were sharing earlier is that there are high need communities throughout the 13 county area
Correct.
that need, and so it's not just, one county or another. And certainly, as you pointed out, some of those highest need areas are, south of I-20, but it's also, it's one of the reasons why you're working in places like Marietta and other places as well. Um, so just this is going to be my final question for our time this morning, but um, surely you've seen some positive movement on some of the specific indicators over the years. And we all love success stories. And so this is your chance to share us your favorite success story from your work over the last several years.
Well, I shared one, which was the barbershop. I just think that being able to take the data to Riverdale, this is
Yeah.
definitely very cool. But I also want to share that there have been some of our grantees that have gone from just using the data to acquiring additional grants, becoming just a grassroots organization, and now they are a signature partner. And so, to me, the index is a point of entry. It's a place to start. Whether to how are we dispersing resources, or how are you as an organization trying to acquire resources? And so, there are the fact that we have over 160 organizations that are using our index. I'm truly excited of what the future holds, and I appreciate that it's a day and time. And we kind of talked about how challenging this year has been, Joy. When we were jumped on the call before the call, we had the call before the call. We talked about how it's easy to get into the space of wow, things are just not going well. So I just want to end. I encourage us all to stay hopeful, stay encouraged, and continue to do the right thing.
Elvin, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your time with us this morning and just the data and the communities that need our help and what some of those needs are. So we really appreciate it, and we look forward to partnering with you in the days ahead. So if you're not already a member of Max, we would go ahead and welcome you to join us. Max is both a network as well as an association. You can feel free to learn more just by scanning this QR code. This will take you right to a page that will kind of talk about the benefits of being part of the Max membership, and we would welcome you to do that. Upcoming with Max, we have some additional Max minutes each month, as you probably know, those of you who've been with us month to month. We'll have Richie Shapiro with Employer Bridge coming in June. Richie will talk about some of the data that they're collecting around workforce needs in the manufacturing sector. We'll then have Joseph Santoro with the Georgia Transportation Alliance. Joseph will talk about their work around the state to kind of look at what our critical transportation needs and what they're doing through the Georgia Transportation Alliance to address and how we can partner. And then in August, our board chair, Jenny Taylor, who many of you know, she's a chief mission officer and vice president of career services with Goodwill of North Georgia, but she's also the chair of MAX, and she will be joining us to do a review of the workforce ecosystem. And this will be an opportunity for those of you who have colleagues who don't really know, who does what, where, and for whom in the workforce. Jenny's going to do a primer for us on August 29th. Again, just a shout out to all of our anchor investors who make this work possible. Just can't thank you all enough for, if you're joining us this morning, can't thank you all enough for what you do. And if you know folks with these organizations, please be sure to reach out to them and thank them for all that they do for our region and our state. So without further ado, again, Elvin, thank you so much for joining us. We will make sure that we send out a link to the Child Wellbeing Index, as well as the slide deck, as well as Elvin's contact information to everyone who joined us this morning. We really appreciate your time this morning. We wish you a good rest of your Friday, a great weekend, and we look forward to being with you again next time. Take care. Thank you all.